Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being there for this session 2 of oral presentation.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, hello everyone. I will be presenting on handling multi-layered misconduct cases today, which is basically a peek into a study or into a survey that me and my colleague Nele Reeg conducted last year. Unfortunately, my colleague can't be here, so I will be presenting the study. Okay, let me find the correct button. Which one is it? What is the correct button? Oh, there you go. I'll start with a short introduction, just to kind of, for those who don't know the German Research Ombudsman, especially from kind of an international context, to kind of know what do we do and what am I doing as part of the German Research Ombudsman. Then I would tell you a little bit more about the survey that we did that was explicitly on authorship and data usage conflicts. Part 3, a bit more about experiences on handling multi-layered conflicts at the German Research Ombudsman. And then I will close with some ideas. So here you see the tripartite structure of the German Research Ombudsman. We handle misconduct conflicts, but only those where you can still mediate. I want to draw your attention to the project that you see on the lower left. This is the research project that's funded by the GFG, where we do different things. I will tell you a bit more about this in a minute. And there you can see me and my colleague. And you can see me twice on this slide because at the moment I also work as a research integrity officer because I'm substituting for a colleague who is on parental leave. So at the moment, I actually also do have some practical insight into actually handling ombudswork. The discussion hubs to foster research integrity project, we are working on multiple things, and I just kind of gave you some things here on the slides. The main focus is to develop guidelines supplementary to the standards of good research practice as formulated in the DFG code. We conducted the survey, a bit more about this in a minute. We publish and give talks. We assist the committee that you saw on the last slides in kind of assessing new research integrity issues. At the moment, that's the topic that everyone is talking about. It's AI and its impact on good research practice. And we also support the office with background research when they have kind of really complex cases. And unfortunately, only available in German so far. This is kind of the biggest publication that we had recently from last year, a book on fairness in science, which is also kind of a very topical question at the moment. So we conducted a survey last year among the roughly 700 ombudspersons in Germany. And the reason why we conducted the survey is simply because we lack numbers in Germany on the type of conflicts that ombudspersons handle, how many conflicts there are, how the conflicts actually look like. We, as the German Research Ombudsman, we publish a yearly report in an anonymized form, and another university at the moment, the University of Göttingen also does at the moment. But for the whole of Germany, we don't have a really good overview of the kind of conflicts that ombudspersons face. So we did this survey to actually find out whether our experiences at the German Research Ombudsman are representative for the whole of Germany, or roughly representative. So we sent out a survey to roughly 700 ombudspersons. They had 6 weeks to fill out the survey. And we have roughly a bit more than 170 completed surveys. And it covered all the subject areas that you see there on the slide. In this presentation, because of the sake of limited time, I will only talk about the 4th point, which is the combination of different forms of conflict, which is what I call the multi-layered conflicts. So what we asked ombudspersons is, how often do you have conflicts, good research practice conflicts, that are overshadowed or intermingled with other types of conflicts? All types of conflicts. And here you see the results. And I think there's a really clear picture that most people said, well, roughly half of the people said that this is often the case, with some people even saying it's always the case. And 23% saying, well, in at least half of the cases. That's something you see. And everybody who works as a kind of a research integrity officer, you might not be surprised by that. But again, it was good to have those numbers at least. So the second question we asked them, okay, so now we know how often this happens, but we want to know what other types of conflicts interfere or overshadow the good research practice conflict. And just a short note on that, it was a multiple choice question and they could give multiple answers here. That's why they don't add up. And you see that something that more than 80% of people chose is lack or insufficient communication among researchers. But another interesting point, and we will come back to that, is that roughly 70% said there was a lack of or insufficient supervision in context of supervision. So we're talking about PhD students and other early career researchers. What is also interesting, especially also in the light for all the Germans in here, but I would also be interested to hear other European perspectives. We have a lot of coverage in Germany on power abuse in academia at the moment in the media. And you see here the numbers for abuse of power, which is like kind of lower, and up there, abusive relationship of dependencies, almost 50% is the case in these kind of multi-layered cases where we have that. And this tunes in very nicely, if I may say so, with the other results from the survey. And I just want to give you kind of a sneak peek. I'm not going to read out those questions, but again, we gave them scenarios on conflicts with access to data, conflicts of data use, and we just asked them, in what kind of context have you witnessed those conflicts? And as you can see that in 70 or more than 70%, they said in the context of supervision. And this is something that we also see in the practical work of the German Research Ombudsman, that when we look at the context of supervision, you have dependency, you have short-term contracts, you have precarious employment, and you have the potential for power abuse. From a German perspective here, just as a short explanation, in Germany, it's normal that your supervisor will also grade your PhD paper and might also be your employer if you have a contract. So that gives them potentially a lot of power over PhD students. We also see, and we just talked about time limitation in highly entrenched cases, so cases that have been going on for a long time, that they take a lot of time to mediate, no surprise here, but it's sometimes simply not possible to resolve the case, not because the QRP problem is so tricky to solve, but simply because it's so difficult to bring the different parties together into an agreement. And it's mostly because of these other types of conflicts. Also, of course, if you have power differentials or kind of conflicts where it's about sexual harassment, power abuse, then of course we have to ask ourselves, which is the more relevant or more important conflict to solve? And this is where the other point here adds up to, that at universities and research institutions, sometimes they lack dedicated bodies to address certain issues or multiple issues. So for example, with power abuse, most, if not all, German universities have an office where staff or researchers can turn to when with sexual harassment. It looks much worse when it comes to power abuse. For example, I know of the University of Leipzig is at the moment preparing such a body to be formed. And with that connected is my last point on that slide, is that there's very little cooperation among the different bodies, and also sometimes a lack of each body's competencies. So we only can address or communicate with other bodies with the explicit consent, of course, of the people who inquire. And sometimes there's kind of a great difficulty to kind of thus address these kind of multi-layered cases because of the lack of cooperation. What can you do about this? I would say first start with prevention as usual. And because I talked a lot about supervision, I think it's really, really important to tackle all kinds of parts that have to do with supervision. So tackling dependencies, all kinds of dependencies, of course, would be a very important prerequisite to help here. Supervision agreements, so kind of really agreeing what is part of supervision, what can early career researchers expect from a supervisor, what are a supervisor's duties, and what are PhD students' rights. Supervision of supervisors would also be ideal. And that's something that we notice a lot, better visibility of ombudspersons. We are approached time and time again by people who say, I just couldn't find the ombudsperson in my university or my research institution. I could not reach them. And we also notice that after giving talks, usually in Germany, we have an uptick of cases because people just find out that we exist and then they come and talk to us. When dealing with cases, of course, awareness is important, awareness for kind of the interconnected nature of these issues, and of course, cooperation among multiple bodies, and if they don't exist yet, establishing bodies to tackle power abuse, but also to tackle other problems. And we talked about it a lot yesterday in the pre-congress session. Changing research culture, of course, promoting cooperation over competition would be important, rewarding responsible research practices, and again, something that I find very important, giving power and agency to early career researchers in order to tackle that. We had the topic yesterday that changing research culture is something that we all want, that we all kind of talk about, but it's very hard to find like what are the necessary actions, what are the steps that I can tell someone to do to actually get this better research culture. And this is also something where I would be really interested to hear from other countries, something that you might have done at your institution, something that you're doing better than Germany, how we could learn. And that's it from me, very short, as I said. Thank you for your attention, and curious about your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. So any question or experiences to share from other countries? Yes.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for these very interesting data. I look forward to the international paper on this. This will be interesting to read. One of the things that you highlight here is this sort of abuse of supervisors on their employees. And we often, at least we talked about that yesterday, it's very important that now they have training on ethical supervision and stuff like that. My sense is also that sometimes these people, they're sort of, they build a career that you start out being a very good researcher, and you're a very good researcher, and then you get some money, and then all of a sudden you start to be a manager of some people. And the whole career you've been doing research. Now all of a sudden you have to be a manager, and you have no clue what to do, and so you become a terrible manager. So I would maybe ask you to reflect on whether the need for training here is actually more into management than in ethics, or whether those two, to what extent those two are linked.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually a very relevant question, and we addressed that in the spring on the research, kind of the Ombuds Symposium that we staged, where we talked about whether it's also leadership quality. Like, are we talking about good leadership qualities? And so we know that professors, they also need to be leaders. But what are the leadership qualities that we're actually looking for in the process of hiring people? And it's usually not like, are you a good manager? Are you a good employer? Like, how is your rapport with your staff? We usually don't look for these, we don't ask for these qualities specifically, but impact factor or not, or kind of publications or whatever. So we agreed, well, we discussed, maybe agreed is a bit too strong. We discussed that it would be very important on the one hand, and there are some pioneer institutions in Germany that look into putting good research practice into the kind of employment process when they kind of hire new professors as PIs, as group leaders, to kind of show, like, do you have the kind of necessary skills to lead a team, to be a good supervisor? And I think that's highly, highly important that we start to think about university and the kind of the leadership and the professors not only as very good researchers, like as excellent researchers, whether we agree on the term excellence or not, but also as good leaders, as good kind of part of the staff who can fulfill this role. And I mean, it's also in a DFG context, who can fulfill this role of promoting early career researchers' careers and help them actually in their work. And I think that's a very, very important point that is not addressed as often as it should be, I think.
Thank you for your presentation. Raphaël Lévy, Université Sorbonne Paris Nord. Yeah, I have a couple of small comments. So the first one is that you said in your conclusion that when you give a talk, then there are lots of cases coming up. And you also mentioned the fact that you want to give agency to young researchers in particular. I think one essential point here is protection of whistleblowers, which is the topic that we will talk again during these 2 days. So that's one point. I think what you described means there is massive underreporting. And so if we are serious about addressing research integrity issues and correcting science, then this should be a primary concern. And I was a bit surprised by how you put lots of very different things under this term conflict. And I'm not so sure, I don't quite see how this works, because there are very different issues that have to be solved in different ways. And I was curious about, in particular, about the mediation aspect, because it seems to me that mediation is a very convenient way for institutions to not make the thing go out of the institution. And so it can be a good thing in very specific cases, but in many other cases, mediation, at the very least, is not going to correct science if papers have been published which are wrongdoing. So yeah, I was curious to the reactions about these few comments.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely the like whistleblower protection. We will talk more about it, and my colleague Yodis will actually talk about the handbook on whistleblower protection. So that is an important topic, and I think, and it goes both ways, both to the whistleblower protection or whistleblowers in general, but also to this topic that I mentioned, that we're being approached more after we give a presentation somewhere, is the idea of visibility, but also lower thresholds. So sometimes people think they can only approach us when there's already a conflict or an escalation of conflict. But to find bodies where people can kind of go to get advice before the conflict maybe arises. And I think this kind of greater approaching or numbers that we get shows that there's a need for this kind of low threshold advice. On your second question, I rushed over this topic a bit. So the difference is, so for the German Research Ombudsman, we basically classify the conflicts into two types, if I may want to put it this way. There's some way you can mediate, for example, authorship conflicts, where there's a dispute about the order of authors, for example, or something about data access where the project is still ongoing. So you can mediate and say, hey, this person should get access. And then, of course, there are other conflicts that you just mentioned. Plagiarism is one, but also fabrication of data, the classic FFPs, where we cannot mediate, where there's no mediation, where there should be sanctioning. And we don't handle those cases. Sometimes we receive those cases, we receive proof of these cases, and then we hand them over to the institutions responsible, usually the research institution where the specific scholar or the specific researcher is employed, and they will handle it. And then there's no mediation, hopefully just sanctioning. So that's what was a bit kind of rushing over this. But yeah, of course there should be, and we do make this differentiation between conflicts where it's worth mediating and it's the correct response to do so, and conflicts where sanctioning is the correct response.
Thank you. Yeah, another question here.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting to understand how much are the consequences on PhD students and precarious researchers here. Do you have any data on people and students that are involving in this type of mediation, and how much a lot of them can give up research after that, and too much, this is too much consequence for them that they have to give up?
Mm-hmm. Again, the problem is data. I mean, you asked for data. I can only give you like personal experience from working and giving advice. We see that regularly. I regularly, unfortunately, talk to PhD students either on the phone or kind of doing inquiries that basically are giving up on their PhDs. But as far as I know, there aren't like precise numbers on like how prevalent this phenomenon is, that these kind of types of conflicts or power abuse or dependency leads to kind of the finishing or not finishing, kind of that PhD students leave before they're finished. And the problem is also, if I might kind of answer on that, is that it can be very complicated for them to leave. I mean, they can, of course, leave the project, but especially if they have already done work. And if I'm talking to them, because I'm focusing on research data, so very often if they have already they already have data, they've generated data, and now they ask me, I want to leave, I can't stay here any longer. What about my data? And I'm the person who sometimes have to give them the bad news that it's not your data. You don't own the data. And then we try to kind of come up with the best way so that they can leave, or whether it makes sense to stay a bit longer to kind of publish the data maybe somewhere. So we kind of go through all the options that they have to kind of give them, again, as much agency as possible to kind of try to find the best option for that situation. But numbers, very difficult. I don't have any numbers, unfortunately.
Thank you all for staying, also those online. I'm going to present on a paper that we published earlier this year about PhD students' perceptions on guest authorships. I'll present you the main results, and then I'll present you some reactions because this paper generated quite a lot of attention, both in international media and also in Danish media. This discussion that came after the publication of the paper gave some further insights into how to interpret these results. So I'll present some of that as well, and then reflect on what it means for people like you who are supervising PhD students, at least some of you, and also for universities and the sort of inter-university organizations like ENRIO. So let's start out with a bigger background. We wanted to see how many students had awarded a guest authorship to a person in power. This is not because similar issues have not been investigated before. In fact, we have a lot of literature on that, indicating that there are quite worrying rates of guest authorships, specifically in the STEM and medical sciences. But the studies that exist, at least prior to ours, were a little bit scattered. So here you can see, for instance, it's a study here that where researchers from South Africa, from the health sciences, have reported quite high, quite common experiences. Then there's a study here from France, also from the health sciences, and it's a bit lower. So does that mean that the problem is less in France than it is in South Africa, or is it because they asked the question differently? Similarly, here we have a study from psychology. Well, it's well below these from health, but because they ask slightly different questions, it's hard to distinguish whether these differences are actually due to facts out in the world or whether they're due to how we ask the question. So we wanted to make more direct comparisons. So we wanted to get a bigger data set, a more diverse data set, where we could compare directly across countries and faculties. And then, partly because the EU insisted on this, we wanted to give a voice to the PhD students. So all these results are from senior researchers responding to questions about guest authorships, but we wanted to give a voice to the PhD students. So we set out to find out how many European PhD students have or believe that they have awarded a guest authorship to a supervisor or some other person in power. It could be their head of department or whatever. We wanted to know why they'd done it. We wanted to know what view of served authorship this perception was based on. I'm not going to present that, but that's also in the paper. And then we wanted to see whether there were differences across different disciplines, gender, faculty, type of data, and whatever. So the way we did it was that we started out with a qualitative study. We interviewed 36 PhD students from 3 different countries, representing all the major faculties. And this was very useful, especially in finding sort of a list of reasons why you might want to give a guest authorship to a person in power. So we took that list and added some additional things, and then we put that into a survey that we did later on among PhD students in 9 different European countries. So we basically made a random draw of PhD schools in different parts of Europe. We invited students to participate, and we set up our inclusion criteria so that we wanted at least 200 responses from each country, and we wanted at least 45 from each faculty in order to be able to compare across. This resulted in a data set with 1,336 responses from 5 different countries. So 5 countries out of the 9 met the inclusion criteria. So we have Denmark, Ireland, Portugal, Switzerland, and Hungary. And out of these 1,336, about 1,100 were sort of included in the analysis. Those that were taken out either said that the questions about authorship did not apply to them, probably because they had not published yet. And then there were some that that either wouldn't answer the question or we couldn't identify the faculty, so we couldn't use them in comparison. I would like to stress that this number is well below what the number of students that we actually invited. So we have a very low response rate in this study. I'll show you a comparative study with a little bit higher response rate just to see what that means. But basically, here are some of the results. So this is the question we asked. During your PhD, have you allowed research group leaders, supervisors, or others in power to become co-authors of papers, even though they did not make a significant contribution to them? And we did not explicate what does significant contribution mean. We based that on their own perception. 34% of the participants said yes to this. 6.7% said they'd done it many times. So this is across faculties and countries. Then we looked into whether there is significant differences across age and gender and country and so on and so forth. And we find that there are significant differences across countries, faculty, and type of data. That is whether you use qualitative or quantitative data. So person using qualitative data within the medical faculty is different than those who are using quantitative data. I think the main interesting thing here is that gender is not significant. That was something that other studies have indicated that it might be. So this is something that we're still debating. It might be within certain faculties. It might be within, not be within others. The differences across country are significant, but they're actually surprisingly small. The very big one is this one about faculties that I will go into more details about now. So here you can see the data split up into faculties. So as you can see, the medical faculties stand out quite a bit. So it's just less than half of the PhD students from this faculty that say that they have awarded guest authorship to a person in power. The STEM sciences, the natural sciences, engineering, they are a little bit lower. And then there is a jump down to the social sciences. But I mean, even this number is still quite high. And then humanities and law. For comparison, I mentioned this low response rate. So there's another study that came out pretty close to our study. There's a slight overlap in the population, and they've asked slightly different question, but they have a response rate of 20% rather than 6%. So what they find, it's only within the medical faculty, but they find that it's 34%, not 49%. So depending on how you ask, it's somewhere in between these two numbers, but it's still quite high, at least. We also asked why they'd done it. As I said, we had this list from the interviews. We added some other reasons that we have from, I've been teaching these things to PhD students for a decade. So we had our own list as well. And they could pick multiple reasons from this list. The one they picked the most often was the person in power told me to. So the second was I wanted to maintain a good relationship with this person. These were often given together, as you can probably guess. Third one was everyone else in my field does it. So it's just, that's common practice. And the fourth one was I believe they deserved it. This was quite, I can show you details later, but these two, the first and the fourth, were very, very rarely given together. And here you can see the reasons. So if you take the share of those who have actually awarded guest authorship, then it's about half of the students who say that they've been told to do it by the person in power. And similarly with this one. Again, if we split up into faculties, we can see that being told to do it by the person in power is much more common in the medical sciences than it is in the other sciences, but there is still quite substantial fractions here. If we look to the reason wanting to maintain a good relationship with a person, the STEM and medical sciences again stand out, but they're in this sort of in the same level. There's not this gap between medicine and STEM. So these are the basic results that I wanted to present. And the next question then is, what does this mean? So we present this to a bunch of people. I've talked to very many doctors about this, and proteins and whatever. And given their reaction, there are sort of two interpretations of this. So one is that the reason why the students feel that this is their perception is, of course, that something has actually happened. So misuse of authorship actually occurred. But there was another reason that came up, this surprisingly often suggested by the senior people, namely that the PhD students don't understand. They don't understand what's going on in the research project. They don't understand. They come into a project late. It's already been designed, and they don't know by whom. And these people who designed the work actually deserve authorship, they believe at least. And therefore, it's the students' problem, not their problem. Our answer to this is to say that in either case, this is being cut off on the slide, I'm sorry. In either case, there's a problem, but it's two different problems. Either there's an ethical problem where people are misusing their power, very much in relation to what was said before. And the other, there's an educational problem, because part of becoming a PhD is, of course, learning what a research process looks like and what are the important parts of it, and how do they fit together. So no matter what the interpretation of this, there's a problem, but the solution is perhaps different. So what should we do about it? Well, there are a number of levels that we can consider here. One is the individual supervisor level. I guess it's sort of trivial to say that we should continue to be fair in our considerations about authorship, but I think the thing that's added here is the importance of communicating this as well. So being sure that not only is authorship attribution being done in a fair way, but actually also that everyone in the collaboration, including the graduate students, understand why this is going on. Why is this person on? Why is this person not on? For institutions, there's an obvious need for training, not just for the junior researchers, but also for the seniors. They also need to know what's going on, and they need to know that their institution has a commitment to integrity. And this is not just done by training, it's also done by actual enforcement. So this was something that, at least in our institution, we've been quite happy to see that the Research Integrity Office has actually been stepping up. And because, I mean, misuse of authorship will never be misconduct. It's not FFP unless it's plagiarism. And then it's quite rare that authorship issues become plagiarism. In most cases, it's questionable practice, and there are tendency not to have very strong sanctions for that. So stepping up the sanctions a bit, making it public that this person is actually not in good standing in this university because this person is misusing authorship. That's an important thing. I've written regular training here as well, saying that one consequence of this paper, at least in our university, is that especially the medical faculty are now considering making training not only mandatory once for senior researchers, but making it mandatory every 5 years, so that you can sort of bring them new developments. Because the problem is, well, maybe some senior researcher took this course 25 years ago and things have changed. So that's an important thing. And then, of course, there's networks like ENRIO. What can we do? I think there are, of course, one thing is just this knowledge sharing, which I think is really important, and working together on publications. I think the experience from this paper is also that we talked about it yesterday as well at pre-congress, some of us, that sometimes we sit back and wait for the scandal, and then we use the scandal as a stepping stone to make some changes. But actually, we don't have to sit and wait for the scandals. We can do investigations like this, the one that was presented before, and if we communicate them in a proper way, they can actually make changes as well. So we can be more proactive in working together in these areas than just sitting back and waiting for the scandals. That was all I had. These are the co-authors on the paper. I look forward to your questions, if there are any. You're not too hungry.
So first question, could you please briefly introduce yourself before asking your question?
Even though I was a presenter before? Okay. Thank you, Mats. A very interesting study that you conducted there. I found it very interesting that you said that granting guest authorships will usually not be considered as a misconduct, but rather as questionable research practices. And I wanted to emphasize at this stage that for us, the German Research Foundation, actually we prosecute this as scientific misconduct. So accepting guest authorships without a substantial contribution to the paper, for example, or granting it will actually be investigated and prosecuted by us as misconduct.
Thank you.
Tobias Grimm, German Research Foundation. Thank you very much for this very instructive results, and they are quite in line with our findings about the underlying incentives and the financing mechanisms. So if you have like performance-based funding, then of course you have the need to be visible. And this is absolutely instructive that the biomedical field is much impacted, because they have these performance indicators and they are bound to the way that they publish. So it's bound to journal publishing, and the areas where you don't see those effects, they like publish books or else. So I think you really need to look at the incentives. You can inform them all the time, but you really see they are in desperate need of financing their institutes. So if you're really honest and have only a PhDs be the authors, then when it comes to institutional sorting mechanisms of resources, you're killed, right? I mean, it's just the end of the story. So you really have strong incentives towards faking the authorships, and I think you need to get rid of the wrong incentives first.
Yes. Well, I think it goes both ways, right? So there's obviously, I mean, I absolutely agree that training about these things will not do it alone. We have to change these perverse incentives to publish or perish. But these things are also happening, right? We have the new means of assessing research, and it's slowly being endorsed by the universities. And part of our job is also to communicate that. That's why we have, I think, a good thing to have this regular training of seniors to communicate from the institution, to say, now we're actually doing things differently. We're not looking solely at your H index anymore. We're not looking solely at the number of publications. So one thing is changing them, but also making sure that people know further down the line.
Hello, I am Julie Carlieu. I'm from Université de Paris, and I had a question because now in many of the scientific publications, you have to state for each author exactly what were their roles, and sometimes it's like management or like shaping the ideas, and sometimes it's doing all the experiments. Do you think it's enough, or do you think it's not really relevant to your I mean, what you presented? So
one day I hope to do a study where we try and take those contribution statements and compare them to the authorship policies of the particular journal, because my sense is that many journals have a authorship policy that they do not enforce. So it would be quite simple for the journal to take their policy and look at the contribution statement and compare them and say, well, this person and this person should not be on. But they don't do that as far as I know. So that would be an interesting study to do. I would say, so the contribution statements are definitely a good thing towards transparency, but as long as they're not used by the journals to weed out authors, then they're not much help in avoiding a misuse of authorship, at least.
I'm Olivier Legal, an agronomist chairing the board of the French Research Integrity Office. And is it not, in my field, agronomy, it's probably something that's in the STEM. It's a common practice. And as was said before, it's for the laboratories, it's important like to label the lab with the label of the PI, and because it's the only way to do so, and it's important for the recognition of the community of this lab. And is it not something that can be solved with the credit taxonomy somehow, or some other kinds of? Because currently there are two ways to get credited in a paper, or three. One is to be cited, one is to be in the acknowledgements, and one is to be an author. And there are no other ways actually. And there are to concur to a publication, there are so many different roles. I think that's something that could be formalized differently, maybe by the journals themselves and by the community altogether. And that's what the credit taxonomy is working at.
So you would I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. So that you have a credit taxonomy that has a broader range of roles compared to the Vancouver recommendations, that you would sort of make it more inclusive and say those who fulfill some credit criteria could be co-authors.
The co-authors are any way to be recognized for their contribution, because actually a lab director, he does something in the lab. It's not like he's doing nothing. So that would be one approach to have. I mean, so I think that was one of the reviews comments to this paper as well. So we sort of implicitly assume that you have some standards for publication, and then the people who fail them are the ones who are doing something wrong. But the review also said, well, there's another option, namely that the standards are too high, and we should change those comparing to the practice. And of course, that is an option. That I think the challenge here is that if we are going to change the standards, then it's important that it's the whole research community, not just the senior people who thinks that it's really important that I run this lab and therefore I'm very important. It's the whole research community, also the junior researchers, that they are also being heard in this process. And that's currently not the case. But if we could make if we could build it bottom up with everyone involved, I don't see a problem with that. But currently, there's not really a voice for the young ones.
Hi, Tamara Welsford again from Spring and Nature. So coming back to your mentioning of the authorship, the contribution statements, at Spring and Nature, we refer to credit, that people can use it or the authors can use it. But about enforcement, it is for a publisher really, not possible to know what the role of the contributor has been. So putting it back on the onus of the publisher is challenging, I would say, but maybe that's not what you meant.
But I mean, the authorship statement is meant to describe what people did.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we publish is what authors present to us, right?
Yeah.
They mention in their submission, this is what we did, but we don't know what they did, So if we, as a matter of fact, we do have a lot of authorship disputes based on, what the contributions have been from particular people, and we never are able to figure that out. We always have to go back to the institution to help us make sense of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, and then the institution has the same problem. But yeah, I think it's a little cheap to say that, because I mean, you would assume that they are honest, and if they can't agree, then you send it back to them and say you have to agree, and then they send something back that they agree on, and then I mean you can enforce that. I guess why would that be different from parts of the other things that you do in the research, right? If they send some data, they can say, oh, we don't know if you did that. Oh, we don't know if this is true. I mean, you have to trust what they write, also about their own contributions.
Thank you. I think it's time for lunch. So you will find the lunch next to the welcome desk. And so enjoy, and thank you for your participation.